Hello and welcome today to the Christian Construction Podcast. We want you to stay tuned as we're going to talk about the ministry of a young preacher. We began a couple of weeks ago dealing with it. I'm here with Brother Matt, Brother Chad Bailey, Brother Josh Montgomery. So we want you to join us today as we talk about the ministry of a young preacher here on the Christian Construction Podcast. All right, well, it's good to be here today. You gentlemen, thank y'all for joining us. Brother Matt, let's get some pleasantries out of the way. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. How you doing, bro?
I'm doing well. You doing as well as you were when we recorded this?
30 minutes ago.
30 minutes ago? Yeah, all right, so still doing good.
Not much has changed.
Not much has changed. Brother Josh Montgomery, pastor of the Safe Harbor Baptist Church. How are you doing?
I'm doing the same I was 30 minutes ago.
Doing just well.
I'm doing great.
And in that time span, we got Brother Chad Bailey, pastor of the Slippery Rock Baptist Church from Slippery Rock, Pennsylvania. The only time it's okay to go to church and be on a slippery rock is at Slippery Rock Baptist Church
That's
in
a fact.
Pennsylvania. Brother Chad, thank you for joining us today.
My privilege,
How
my
you
privilege.
doing?
I'm doing very well. It's good to come back south where people talk like me. I love it.
Brother Chad is his first time coming to our meeting. We, our pastor, and myself and many of us, we've been in youth camps, we've been in men's conferences, we've been
Yes.
in camp meetings together.
Many times
We were
over.
just in meeting a couple weeks ago together, and always have a great time fellowshipping. And so Brother Chad is here at our meeting for the first time. Been a great week thus far. We got to hear Brother Mullins preach last night.
Tremendous.
Very convicting. I thought I had learned how to shake that off of me, but I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Brother Epps still can do it good,
Yeah.
but I can't get that conviction off of me. The Lord is still dealing with me this morning as I got up and got to my place to pray just about the seriousness of prayer.
Tremendous.
I think it was great last night, and I appreciate the Lord meeting with us.
Amen.
Well, we want to talk today, continue a discussion we began, and again, a lot of these interviews, we recorded them one right after the other, so this may be airing a couple of weeks or maybe a week or maybe 3 weeks after our interview with Brother Josh, but we're going to continue a discussion we began, if you go back and watch the first part of this episode, with Brother Josh on the ministry of a young preacher. Brother Josh gave us several things. Brother Josh, could you give us a rundown real quickly? I know
Yeah.
it'll take you a minute.
Yeah,
Pull it up. Brother Josh gave us about 5 or 6, maybe 7 things we just discussed and kind of laid a foundation for the ministry of a young preacher. Brother Josh, would you just kind of spit those out to us?
Yeah, we talked about your conversion must be settled. Sure. We said it's good for every preacher to be saved.
Amen.
And
Praise God.
Yeah, also your calling must be sure.
Yes.
Not mama called and papa sent.
Yeah.
You've heard the old phrase. Have convictions and standards. Boy, we need that in this generation of preachers. Committed to the sanctuary, your local church, receiving counsel from your shepherd, your pastor. Even to the point of how you look, how you dress, how you carry yourself. And in that regard, I want to clarify, we're not
Absolutely.
talking about, we understand not everybody has the same ability to financially go out and buy the fancy suit, but you can look nice, you can look presentable, and carry yourself as a man of God. Study, a place of prayer, and just serving the Lord where you're at. And I think the last thing we talked about was not promoting ourselves.
Right.
Because it is all about the Lord Jesus Christ.
That's right. So we're going to pick up there in just a moment. We just wanted to give you a brief summary of what we had already covered. But real quickly, Brother Bailey, if you would just tell us about you getting saved, where you from,
Sure.
how you got to where you're at now, and
Thank
then
you.
before we head in.
My privilege, 17 years old when I got saved. The church that sent me to youth camp was the church that I was ordained in. Got saved there at youth camp on a Wednesday morning back in 1994, and went into the ministry within a year there on staff at that church, and then into Sammy Allen's Bible College at Faith Baptist College under Stennett Ballou, Fane Jordan, Wayne Henderson, Sammy Allen. Great men, just a great period of time in my life, and went straight into pastoring the last 2 years of Bible college. I'd become a pastor. And I got married and have been in the ministry ever since. And the Lord has been much better to me than I deserve. And I really appreciate the privilege of being here today with you guys.
How long have you been up in Pennsylvania, Pastor?
This month is 5 years. The 25th of January will be 5 years.
Wow, that's hard to believe. Now, Brother Chad, we're going to get to the young preacher stuff in a few minutes, but pastoring up north, you were in South Georgia.
Yes, I was in South Georgia for
Valdosta?
13. Near Valdosta, there's a little town called Lakeland, Georgia.
Lakeland, Georgia.
I'm sure all of you go there on vacation from time to time. But sometimes confused with Lakeland, Florida. But it's Lakeland, Georgia, just outside of Valdosta, and I was there in that church for 13 years.
Wow. And then from there to Slippery Rock, what's the mileage difference?
About 14 hours of traveling time. So if you're going to travel it, you got to give yourself about 16 hours to make that trip.
So that's that's not the church down the road. That's
Huge
that's
change.
a drastic change.
Tremendous. And
Did you have any members change churches and that?
yeah,
Any cross-ride any of them, take them with you?
nobody left with me. I
So,
could barely get my
there,
wife to
you
go
know,
with me.
So, Brother Chad, you went from pastoring in the Deep South
Yes,
to pastoring in the Far North.
yes.
Which you've invited us. We've talked about coming up, and
Yeah.
and you said we come up. We're going to take you to Niagara Falls, and me being geographically,
Yeah.
incapable of realizing exactly how far Pennsylvania stretched towards that region.
Yeah.
I thought, wow, that's going to be a pretty good haul. And I got to looking at it. Brother, y'all are what, 2 hours maybe from the Canadian line, maybe 3.
About 3 hours from Canada. Yeah.
Man. Wow.
Yeah.
So that is a drastic change. So that all that being said, you go from the Deep South to the Far North like that. What are maybe some of the differences, or maybe what are the difficulties of pastoring in the North?
Well, my fear when I went to the North was, what was I going to have to change to be able to go there? And that really was a deep fear of mine. That gave me a lot of, thinking about going. That really had to be factored into my decision to go. What am I going to have to change to take a church in the North?
Yes.
I was very comfortable where I was. We had a great Christian school, had just been through
Large ministry.
about a $500,000 building program, brand new auditorium. The church was doing great. And leaving all of that to go to a place that was totally unknown to me, I'd preached in the North several times, but pastoring in the North and preaching in the North is two different animals.
Absolutely.
What they can put up with for a week, they may not be able to put up with for a year. And so I was thinking to myself, well, maybe these people don't want me, but this is where my fears were settled, is that doctrine is not location sensitive. It is not time sensitive. The same Holy Ghost that lives in us in the South is the same Holy Ghost that lives in those people in the North. And so my fears became more about, well, are they going to accept my accent? Are they going to accept my ways? Can I go anywhere and buy grits up there? Things of that nature, and sweet tea, and we laugh at those kind of things. But there's such a culture shock when you go up there, because the food is different. The way the people talk is very different. We call it a creek in South Georgia. They call it a crick up there. We call her
I thought that was in your
Mama.
neck.
That's what I thought too.
Oh, okay.
When they were talking about that, somebody said, let's go get a toboggan. Well, I thought we were going to go get something to keep our head warm, but they're talking about riding down through a slide and all. So they're and I remember the first day that I said reckon from the pulpit, and everybody laughed out loud. I mean, they really got a good hearty
That's
belly
a good
laugh.
Bible word.
It is a
though.
Bible word, and so I chastised them about laughing at it. But our relationship
What every
has been,
preacher does when he feels like he's been
Yeah.
embarrassed.
Yeah.
Shame on you.
it's your fault, not mine.
That's right.
But you don't have to get along with. I don't have to get along with you. You have to get along with me, kind of
That's
attitude.
right. That's right.
But our relationship has been very productive. I found this to be true, and this is experience talking. I can't give you a Bible chapter and verse for this, but preachers that go from the South up to the North generally do very well. I mean, there are people that come to our church that they just come to hear me talk. As a matter of fact, the first 5 or 6 or 7 months that I was there, we just had an insurgence of people that came into the church that they just love to hear the Southern drawl. They love to hear how I pronounce the words. They love the slow demeanor, that we have, and all of those things really were an attraction. But eventually, that runs its course.
Yes.
And you come back to fascination with the Word of God and fascination with doctrine.
Absolutely.
And you have to if you build a church on a personality, it'll crumble when that personality leaves. And so we've done our best to expositorily preach through the Word of God for those people. And boy, they have bought into that vision. And doctrine does not change. Delivery can change.
Sure.
And I'm willing to change my delivery. If I go to a place that they don't necessarily care for loud preaching, or if they really would rather have more of a teaching mentality. I don't have a problem changing my delivery. I refuse to change doctrine.
Amen.
And so going to the north, I haven't found that to be a challenge. There are cultural issues. And then let me just say this, that there are things that they haven't been taught up there that are just second nature to us in the
Sure,
South.
yeah.
I mean, these are
Would you
things
say it's
that...
a cultural thing, or is it really
Yeah,
a Bible thing?
well, the culture, it's inevitable that culture affects what people believe. It's like an island. The church is like an island in the middle of the sea, and the waves of the sea are constantly beating against that island. So you can't have that. You can't have a church without some culture influence in your church. It's just inevitable. I pastor in a university town. We have a 10,000 member university right across the street from our church. And we run church buses into that university and pick up college students every single Sunday. And, when you've got pew loads of university students sitting out there, it's like a mission field almost.
Yes.
I mean, you're talking about kids out there that are making a choice to come to church and hearing philosophies and policies throughout the week that are humanistic, atheistic, agnostic. And so it really demands that you rise to the occasion of feeding people that are sort of on a different level at times. And so then, my messages are very diverse. I mean, I do my best to preach things that sometimes it's not a kiddie pool message. It's deep in stuff sometimes. And we have professors that are members of our church. And so I say all of that to say this, just about every city, just about every town in the north has either a college or a university in it.
Sure.
And you're going to face a lot of that going up there. And so, knowing your Bible and having an answer for the hope that lieth within you is really a credible stance. You have to have that.
Brother Chad, that's something else I was going to ask you about, because I remember one of the first things that you and I talked about when you first took that church. You began to tell me about the ministry with that university, with the
Right.
college,
Yeah.
and just how the Lord opened that door with the society and the generation that we have. I have preached this. This is what I have said from the pulpit. These are the most spiritual days we've ever lived in. Not the right kind of spirit.
I agree with you. Yeah.
But the most spiritual days,
That's
in
a
the sense
tremendous...
that everyone is seeking something.
Yeah. That's
right.
And when you take college kids, everything has to have a fact. It has
Absolutely.
to have a logic. There has to be something to back up what it is. They want to know the facts.
True.
The reason they're at college, they want to know the facts.
Yeah.
Or seemingly want to know the facts. So would you speak to the type of ministry that you have? You mentioned that y'all will literally run buses in there to get them. And then I know you had told me that y'all did some other things. Just talk about some of that for just a moment.
We actually, every other Sunday, we provide a home-cooked hot meal for all of our university students. So obviously, every bit of this is free of charge. It's ministry, so we don't charge anything for that. And they come over, and what I found is these university students, they miss their little brother, and they miss their little sister at home, and they miss their mom, they miss their dad. And so we actually adopt them into our families. We have ladies in our church that really come into a close ministry with the young ladies in our college and become mother figures to them. We're not trying to replace parents.
Right.
I think that's a very dangerous thing to try to do. When somebody says, well, I'll be a father to you, I'll be a mother to you, that's dangerous. But we do our best to give them a home away from home. And we find that they really are drawn into our church in those terms more than anything else, because we have pew loads of families. I mean, we'll generally have about 45 to 50 in our youth choir.
Yes.
There's just kids everywhere. There's teenagers everywhere, and moms and dads that reach out to them in a very generous and to provide things for them that they possibly would need. And so the meals deepens our fellowship with them. The family atmosphere deepens our fellowship with them. And we involve them in as many activities. We have a gymnasium on our property, and we involve them in as many activities as we can possibly involve them in. Like we just recently, we have 3 volleyball teams in our church, all girls volleyball teams. And so we got together all those college girls, and we put them on a team, and they're all very athletic, and we played them against our high school girls, and that's an experience. I mean, that's a great time together. It deepens fellowship. Everything we do it has a deepening effect on our influence with them in the church. You know,
Hey,
so
man,
I'm
and so
thankful.
it could be said, you're not just creating a community, you're creating a family atmosphere.
Yes, absolutely.
To help them be able to
Yeah.
give them some stability and structure while they're during this time
Yeah.
away from home.
Yeah, and you know, one aspect of that is I just feel like we have a university-funded missionary program. Because they're coming to us instead of us going to the world. We've had, I'll never
that's
forget,
something.
Yeah.
probably, I don't know, 4 years ago, something like that, we had a young lady, and I know how social media is, so I'll keep names to a first-name basis, but we had a young lady, her name was Emily, and she was a Chinese girl. She was born in China. I think you can only have 2 children in China. I think the government regulates you to having 2. Well, she was number 3. And so her mother left her in the elevator as a newborn infant, left her in the elevator of a government facility. She was taken up by the government, raised by the government in China, came as an exchange student to Slippery Rock University, walked into the services, and I get chill bumps even thinking about this now, but she walked into the service on a Sunday morning and said, I'm looking for truth. That's the first statement that she ever made to me. And so she got saved by the grace of God. We baptized her in our church, and she's going back to China as a physical therapist.
Wow.
And I can't tell you how many times we have German students right now. We have a young man named Giannis. I think I'll just use his first name, but we have a young man named Giannis, and his fiance have been coming to our church for quite some time. And he walked into our church, and he said, I've never been to a Baptist church before. He's from Germany.
Yeah.
And never walked into a Baptist church. He said, I've never seen a King James Bible. And I said, stop right there. And we have church Bibles just like this in our church, and I went back there and got him a very nicely bound church Bible and gave it to him and gave it to his fiance. And things like that just endear. You're talking about deepening a closeness to someone. He had never even seen a King James Bible. So the mission field through the university is coming to us.
Wow.
And God has put us in a position right across the street from them, you know.
Amen.
And God has put us in a position to reach the world through a local ministry. It's very
Amen.
unique. It comes with challenges. I mean, it comes with challenges. But we've seen college students that are first-year students that we would never let on the platform of our church, you know, because of modesty issues and things of that nature. I don't think it'd be out of order to say that.
No,
but,
you're right.
we have a platform standard in our church. If you're going to sing in our youth choir, if you're going to sing in our choir. But we've had first-year college students that we would have never let on our platform. But by the time they've been there 2 and 3 and 4 years, brother, they're walking with God so closely that they're in our orchestra. They're in our choir. They're singing specials in our church, and you know we can't. We've got a 4 or 5 year window. We can't do everything for them. We can't set everything right, but we do have a criteria that we try to follow that involves them into the ministry. And then we have a provisional church membership ministry for them that they can't be full blown members of the church, you know, but. They want to take communion, and they want to be part of the services, and they want to be part of the youth group. So we sort of have a special provisional college membership in the church, and that's been profitable as well. So we've changed some policies here and there. We've changed nothing doctrinally. I mean, we believe the Bible, every word of the Bible is true to us, and so we don't compromise anything in Scripture. But policy-wise, in a university town, you have some things like that going on. So coming to the north, you're going to have to modify some of your vision.
Yes.
You know, Jesus said, look on the field. I mean, you got to get out there and look at the field. Look at the harvest. That's the focus here is the harvest. And so you do have to modify some things to accommodate that harvest.
And Brother Chad, you mentioned it, and we have a pretty good-sized bus ministry. What scares a lot of
Absolutely.
people is, but what are they going to look like when they get here?
Yeah.
Well, they're going to look the way sinners
Yeah,
look.
exactly.
right.
They're going to do what sinners. We're picking up kids that their vernacular of some of the words that I have heard them use, and we quickly stop them and tell them what they can and cannot.
It's not
but
appropriate.
the words that they use as a lost man, I don't even know if I knew them. I mean, that's how bad they are. But they're doing what lost people do, raised in a lost,
Absolutely.
sin-filled world, in
Yeah.
a sin-filled environment. And I think that scares people.
Yeah.
But how else are you going to reach them? You're not
Yeah.
being like them. You're not compromising. Like you said, you have a platform standard, but you're trying to reach them where
Right.
they're at.
Right.
And-
we don't
and
change anything.
It's a different day than it was.
That's absolutely true.
You know, I've heard people talk about preachers running people off the property for not being dressed accordingly.
Yeah.
It's one thing if it's don't get me wrong, if it's a church member or a preacher or something like
Right,
that,
right.
and you have a standard for those people. But when you're talking about, like you're talking about, reaching sinners, reaching them where they're at.
Yeah.
We talk about the bus ministry, trying to help people where they're at and reach them. It's a whole nother ballgame, and I think that scares people when you
It
talk about
does.
ministries like what
Yeah.
you do.
Yeah, it really
Well,
does.
we have, wow, it's been great.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
far. That is amazing. Well, let's pick up a little bit where we left off on talking about a young preacher,
Mm-hmm.
the ministry of a young preacher. And let's just start with we call it the impossible question, I guess, that we asked. And
In my defense, I had no heads up that he was going to ask that. So he didn't give me a chance to prepare.
Brother Larry
anything.
Raines would call this a canard. Real canard.
so what the question that we're going to start off with, we talked about this off the air, and after we talked to Brother Chad, we all believe this too. So
Brother Chad just
well, we're
says
gonna let
it
Brother
better.
Chad give the verbal
Right.
answer to
Yeah,
it.
he's our
we all-
spokesman.
He's
Yeah.
our spokesman. So
We-
here's the question. Now,
hardly.
we're talking about young preachers, but Josh also talked about it's important that a preacher be saved. So the
It helps.
question is, there are men, and Brother Chad addressed this in the full why it happens this way, but then once it does happen,
Sure.
what does a man do? So we're going to talk about real quickly a man that has been saved, or that says he's saved, and then says he's called to preach, but then realizes he's lost. He has missed it altogether, and now he's saved. Is that man still called to preach? Should that man continue preaching? What is a young man to do should that happen?
Well, let me say, first of all, brother, what you said, was kind of, we may have chuckled about it and took it tongue in cheek, but it was very profound. I mean, it is true that every preacher needs to be saved.
Absolutely.
And I'm shocked at the product that we are pumping out of our Bible colleges of guys that they don't have any evidence whatsoever of being saved, much less a call to preach on their
Yes,
lives.
that's right.
And that's not a knock against every Bible college. I'm not painting with such a broad brush that would include everybody. But I have, I've been there when preachers got saved, and I know men that were pastoring when they got saved, and that's a shocking experience to think that somebody has stood in the pulpit with no saving grace in their life, and. So I've seen it where this is what I believe happens, and this is an observation-based statement. This is purely observation. But my experience has taught me that a lot of times what happens is, there's a false profession. They get saved when they're very young. It doesn't pan out. They don't live for God through their teenage years. When they have an opportunity to make independent decisions, all of their decisions are not good decisions. You can tell that they really don't have any lordship basis in their life whatsoever. And then they go to a Bible college somewhere, or they get up in their teenage years and decide to leave home, and they feel the Lord begin to tug at their heart about getting saved, and they think that, well, I've already gotten saved, and so this must be a call to preach. And they misinterpret a call to salvation for a call to preach. And so we are pushing these guys into the ministry because all of us would celebrate a young man getting called to preach. I mean, we want that, And so, and many times we're just reduced down to taking a man for his word. And so they make the mistake of, God is calling me to preach, when it was actually God tugging on their heart to have their life in salvation. And they go into the ministry. I've seen these guys get degrees from Bible colleges, go right out into the pastorate, and have no power whatsoever in their message. I mean, it's very academic. It's very refined. They can alliterate all the outlines, double front door alliteration, double back door alliteration. All of your subpoints are alliterated, but you can learn all of those faculties. You can academically achieve any of that kind of stuff in a good hermeneutics and homiletics Bible college.
Sure, yes.
And so we pump them out with a career mentality, and when it comes right down to where the rubber meets the road, they don't have an answer for the hope that lies in us.
Right.
Because I'm telling you, there's some things that they tell you and that they teach you in Bible college that are extremely valuable. There are other things that I'm thinking to myself, I never heard about this in Bible college.
Yeah.
And so you have to be able to draw out of a well of salvation.
Right.
To be able to tell another saved man what you're experiencing. And so I think that it's very dangerous. And, I think that the faction comes where a man says, okay, now I thought I was saved, I thought God called me to preach, and now I realize I'm not saved, and so I need to get saved and I need to get baptized, but I want to keep my preaching ministry. I think that's the basis of the question that you're asking about. 10,000 times no. I don't see how that could ever be a reality, because I believe that the first work that God does in a person's heart is saving grace. That's the first work that He does in a person's heart. He renews your mind. He delivers you from the power of darkness into the power of light. He gives you a new nature. He gives you a divine nature. How can you preach without a divine nature? How can you preach without a heart that has been renewed, a mind that has been renewed? And so the natural-minded man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God. They are foolishness unto him. I had a lady tell me one time, she said, well, I've always loved God. And I said, that's just not the truth. I mean, there was a time when you were an enemy of God. And these guys that are in the pulpit preaching as the enemy of God, that is exceptionally dangerous. And I think that we lived by that sword back you saw a lot of that in the 1980s and the 1990s especially. And we lived by that sword. And I'm afraid, brother, we're dying by that sword today. I think that we have ministries that are being led by men that God was calling them to salvation instead of calling them to preach, and they're sort of they're living by the power that was given to them in that degree instead of the power that was given to the Apostle Paul to open blinded eyes, and I fear that.
I think I heard a preacher say this a while back. He said, and this I think this fits here. He said, we're sending men out, not out of qualification, not because they're qualified, but out of necessity. Well, there's a need here. There's a need there. And where that becomes dangerous is if it doesn't matter how qualified they are, then we reduce the importance. And eventually you take it all the way back from, it doesn't really matter if he's qualified as long as he's saved, and then it gets to where it don't even matter if he's saved.
Right.
Well, he's a preacher.
Yeah, it's just another compromise.
We don't take the importance on it. So.
And we use the word compromise sometimes because we heard it so much, and we heard compromise. But when you really look at the word compromise, this is definitively one of the greatest compromises in our movement. I mean, if you're not telling a person you have to be saved to preach the gospel, what else are we going to fail on? This is so fundamental to the problems that are being produced in our generation that I think there has to be a remedy for it. And it's coming. I think that remedy is going to come. There's going to be a revival of awareness that this is a problem in our movement, and it's coming.
Brother Josh, you've got some things still in front of you. Let's pick up some where we left off a couple weeks ago. Then
I think another major thing with a young preacher he needs to be careful with. He needs to be cautious with social media.
Absolutely.
My goodness.
We're living in.
What a statement.
And I'll say the best thing on social media is a Christian Construction podcast and the Higher Grounds podcast.
Sure.
That's the best thing on social media.
Slippery Rock Baptist Church YouTube channel.
Yeah, and Safe Harbor Baptist Church Facebook channel.
Right.
We live stream. So,
Yeah.
but as a young preacher, you get so caught up because, let's just be honest, there's preachers out there. There are men who claim to be preachers, put it like that, and they can't do anything without taking a selfie and post it on the social media and making it it goes back to that promotion. So as a young preacher, he thinks, well, I've got to do this to get my name out there, to get all that, and you get caught up in all that, and I told somebody the other day, I said, what is social media really about? It's all about you. Self-promotion, promoting yourself. Now, it can be used for good things.
Right.
Oh, no doubt.
Keeping up with missionaries, great things like that, great things. But for everything that can be good, the devil can turn it and be a bad thing. Absolutely. And I say this too, as a young preacher, it's easy to get caught up in an argument in the social media world.
Yes.
And you're not gonna, believe it or not, those people you're arguing with in your social media, you're not going to change them.
Not going to change their mind.
They're just trying, and all that time you wasted arguing with them, it was unprofitable. It was spent unprofitably. Yeah.
Here's a big difference in what we grew up in. The social media boom, if I remember right, I think it started around like 05, 06. It really started with, I think it started with MySpace. I think that's correct.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Sounds right.
So we talked to Brother Andy. We interviewed him, and we talked about, the life of the ministry before social media. and then the life of the ministry since. And
I remember that.
He had about 15 years before, from about 90, 91 up to that 05, 06. And so from there to now.
Yeah.
So he's got a kind of a half and half. And of course, we were talking about ministering to people, but when I look at that in light of the young preacher, I think about this. There are things that I'd done as a young preacher and maybe didn't put it on social media, that because it was just me, only me, I was able to, I'm glad nobody really knew that I was that dumb or that
Wow.
I was that foolish or
Now they're
that
Facebook
ignorant.
Living.
But now it is on social media. It has an electronic footprint.
Yep.
There is if it goes online, if it
Yep.
goes anything digital, it can be tracked down and it can be used, as we have seen proven in our public realm. It
Yeah.
can be pulled out and used again against you at some point. And so I think that is something that we all,
Yeah.
those of us who have been in the ministry a long time, but especially a young preacher,
Yeah.
be sure that they know the ramifications and the consequences of just putting out anything on
Right.
social media.
I think a young preacher even ought to ask his pastor, are you okay with me being on social media?
Absolutely.
And if the pastor says no, then no. That should be, I think
Absolutely.
you ought to be, if the pastor don't want him on social media or anything like that, I think you ought to adhere to that.
Yes.
That man's leadership.
We had a young person in our church one time come to me. He said, and he thought the Lord may be calling him to preach. And he said, me and some of our friends, we're going to start a YouTube channel and we're going to do like funny
Yeah.
stuff and prank each other and stuff like that. He said, what do you think about it? I said, let me ask you a question. Do you remember talking to me saying that you think the Lord may be calling you to preach? He said, yeah. I said, well, do you want people to take your calling serious? He said, well, yeah.
Yeah.
And I said, well, do you want that to be what people know about you first? I said, I'm not saying you can't.
Right.
I said,
That's tremendous.
The difference in maybe an established man of God saying some things that are funny
Right.
or
Yeah.
doing
Right.
something or maybe even making a video that's funny is far different, because he has already established his credibility. He's already established his seriousness
Right.
in the ministry. This is your first impression to the whole world.
Well, Paul told Timothy, let no man despise thy youth. Me and Brother Keith Voles was talking about the other day.
Yes.
He may have talked about this, or Brother Andy may have. You cannot help what somebody does,
Right.
how they act towards you.
Right, absolutely.
But I believe, and Brother Keith said, don't give them a reason
Yeah.
to despise
He got
you.
that from me. I told him that.
Oh, he got that from you.
That's right.
I knew it.
Let me add this.
I got it from Paul, though. So.
If I could just interject this, and that this
Yeah.
is just sobering to me that this topic, has to come up as much as it does,
Yes.
because it's becoming more and more of a monster all the time. Back in the 1950s, the 1960s, the 1970s, even before really even television ministries were taking off, old men of God like Harold B. Seitler and Oliver B. Green and Lee Robertson up in Chattanooga, those men. They had to labor in the ministry for years
Yes.
to get what they called followers. And I mean, to have 1,000 followers at Tabernacle Baptist Church, it took decades to get to that level. And now we're thrusting these young men at 25, 30 years old into a broad brush ministry with thousands and tens of thousands of followers. And they don't have the experience of ministry and the experience of pastoring that tempers their message, that tempers their conduct,
Right.
that tempers their application of their personal life to other people's lives. And that is the danger of it. It really is and I know this has become a dirty word in our movement, but it really is a novice danger.
Yes.
To launch yourself out publicly when you really don't have a lot to say.
Right.
And you haven't paid the price for being able to say that stuff. And I'm offended by the fact that, I'm like Brother Wells. I came up in a time when there was no social media, and so I remember those days when you longed for exposure.
Right.
Now that exposure is being delivered to these guys on a silver cart, and they have as much exposure at 25 years old as Dr. Seitler had when he was 65 and 50
Well,
years
wouldn't
old.
you agree even more? Because they just had the radio then, was a radio ministry.
Correct.
And
Yeah.
we've got everything now.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, daily,
Exactly.
they had a radio ministry, maybe Oliver Green and Dr. Seitler was on every day.
Every day.
For
The
30
Bright
minutes.
Spot Hour.
Now, you can post something every 30 seconds.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's
So
incredible.
It's very, very dangerous
Yes.
for a young preacher. Best thing a young preacher can do sometimes is just shut up, sit down,
Yeah.
sit by his pastor,
Yeah,
let
that's
his
so true.
pastor give him the advice concerning a lot of these things.
It can't be said better than that. It's
John the
best to sit
Baptist,
by your
Luke
pastor.
chapter 1, verse 8, John the Baptist, Bible said he was in the wilderness and in the deserts.
Yes.
And the Bible said, I thought this phrase was interesting, till the day of his showing.
What about that?
And he was content to be in the shadows. And the day of his showing, he gets up to preach one day, and he's preaching, and he looks out, and he sees Jesus in his
That's
congregation.
tremendous.
And if you'll just be content in the shadows, you'll get, when God gives you that opportunity,
You know,
you'll look up and see he's there.
You know, some of these ministries that are social media based, I mean, they're founded in applications of social media. If it gets bad in our country, that ministry dissolves just like that. I mean, if we do have some sort of terrorist attack that takes out electricity or takes out internet access in our country, and I mean, that's possible. I mean, we've had those attacks in the past where entire cities have lost their capability to go online, and a power grid or something like that is attacked, then your ministry is dissolved immediately. A man who has a Bible in his hand and has a message in his heart, you know, like John Bunyan, who was thrown into prison in England, and his people were congregating around the walls of the prison to hear John Bunyan preach in the courtyard of the prison. And the warden of the prison said, we won't allow this. So he put him in the innermost parts of the prison so nobody could hear him preach anymore. And then the story goes that while he was there, he wrote Pilgrim's Progress.
Wow.
And so, you know, I wonder, these guys that their ministry is, my blood pressure's going up just a little bit, forgive me. But I wonder what
Go ahead,
these
get it out
guys would do, you know, if you know, you can't live stream out of a prison cell, you know. So I wonder if they would have the same
not supposed
attitude as the Apostle Paul, you know, who said in prison in Philippians chapter number 1, he said, Christ is preached and therein do I glory. And he was chained to a Roman centurion when he made that statement. Let me just add this, and I don't want to absorb all the time. But I've learned this to be true, that, you know, some of these media ministries, they're about 10,000 miles wide, about 1 inch deep, and they're very, very fragile.
So you've
And
watched some of
let
our
me-
episodes.
well, not you guys, for sure. But, you know, I heard an older preacher say this one time, and matter of fact, it was Stennett Blue. He said it to me, and he's in heaven now, a hero of mine. For years and years, I didn't wear my class ring. I started wearing it again because of Brother Blue's memory, but he said this to me one time. He said, you worry about the depth of your preaching, and God will give you breadth for your preaching. And boy, we need that. I mean, and you know, some of the stuff I see on social media, the guys they look like they just come out of a chicken fight somewhere. First of all, they don't even look like preachers.
Right, that's right.
And it bothers me that we are providing them with an audience. You know, it reminds me of what the Apostle Paul said about those guys that were not qualified in Titus chapter number 1. He said, these men's mouths must be stopped.
Yes, sir.
And boy, we should take that as serious as any other call in the New Testament. It was stop these men's mouths.
Absolutely.
Our children are, I'm passionate about this. Brother Michael, you can testify about this, and you as well. We got children, my boys will never hear Stennett Blue.
Yeah.
That's right.
Brother Blues with the Lord. I mean,
Yeah.
other than
True.
by way of, you know, recording, things of that
Media,
nature.
yeah.
My kids will never hear Brother Billy Mitchell.
That's right.
Those men that were, I mean, you look up the word preacher in the dictionary, you're going to see that Stennett Blue, Billy Mitchell. Those
Yeah.
men have got Milford Biddle.
Buster Seaton.
Buster Seaton.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm glad I got to grow up around Billy Kelly,
Yeah.
Mays Jack. I never got
You
to
better
meet Brother
believe it.
Mays Jackson, but I listen to them online and listen to message. They're not going to hear that.
No, that's right.
And they're going to need a generation of preachers
Yeah.
to pick up the banner
I agree.
and carry it.
I agree.
And I'll say this. Those men that are carrying, don't attack them. If they're preaching,
That's the
if it was
truth.
right when Mays Jackson and Dr. Seitler and Oliver
So true.
Green, it's still right.
That's right.
It's still
That's
right. And
And the common denominator, I think, between all those men is that they took their cause serious.
that's exactly right.
They knew what they believed.
They paid a price for
They
it.
paid.
They sure
They
did.
paid the price. I think when I think about just that phrase, paying the price, I think about what Paul said. He said that I may know Him. If you want to know Christ, the first thing you're going to know Him in is in the fellowship
His suffering.
of His suffering.
So true.
And so it's not, you know, it's simple serving the Lord, being in the ministry. It's very simple
Yeah.
what to do, but it ain't going to be
Yeah.
easy.
I
Yeah,
don't-
a dislike is not persecution.
right.
I mean, you know, for somebody to say,
An unfriend.
okay, I'm going to unfollow you on Twitter, and that's persecution. Come on, man. We have redefined this whole thing has given it's very unsavory to me to even think about guys that say, well, you know, I'm under a lot of pressure right now because I don't have as many followers as I used to have. And come on, man, that's, you know, there's something really raunchy about that. If I can pull out an old word, there's something really
That is a word.
The other
rot,
night,
gut, nasty.
I know we're getting short on time, but I listened to Brother Ed Ballou.
Yeah.
He's Brother Stennett's cousin.
In heaven now.
And then Brother Berman Cape.
Yeah.
And if you've never looked up the video on YouTube of the interview they done Brother Ed Ballou and Brother Berman Cape, and you look it up. But they tell stories. Brother Berman said the most I ever got in the offering was $7. Most he ever got in a love offering preaching. And
incredible.
And our generation is, and I understand times were different then, but our generation is so spoiled. Brother Ballou talks about preaching revival meetings and standing for truth. They'd run him out of town, not because he was being a jerk or being just preaching the Bible.
Yeah.
And somebody unlikes us or didn't like our post on social media, and we're persecuted. You know, Uzziah the king went in to burn incense into the temple. He wasn't supposed to do that.
Yeah.
He went straight to burn incense. You know what he had to walk by, though? The brazen altar and the brazen labor. He didn't stop. He wasn't interested in sacrifice, and he wasn't interested in sanctification.
Absolutely.
He wanted that notoriety, and that's the generation of men we're dealing with.
And yeah, the thing too, and I don't know when we're supposed to stop, but the thing about it is too is, you know, the Apostle Paul wrote in Galatians that he withstood Peter to the face.
Absolutely.
For he was to be blamed.
Right.
And you know, some of these fights that are going on in these social media outlets, I'm just thinking to myself, this is the most I mean, if you put these two men in a room, you know, they couldn't fight their way out of a wet paper bag. You know, they really couldn't stand for truth, and so it's really given them kind of a coward's castle, you know, to stand up. And I know people that launch entire campaigns against their pastor on social media. And you know, when it comes to a genuine authority issue, when it comes to a genuine doctrinal issue, you're supposed to go withstand that man to the face. Don't put it on Facebook.
That's right.
Go stand up in front of his face and say, you are to be blamed for what you've done.
Yeah. Well, we have, man, this has been great. I really could do this all day, but we got to go eat lunch sometime. So we're going to go do that.
I'm all for that,
too. Brother Chad, thank you.
My
so
privilege.
much for coming by.
Thank
Brother
you.
Josh,
Oh, man.
this will not be the last time you're on here because you don't live that far. So,
I'm glad to
we
do it.
appreciate you coming down, Brother Matt. Appreciate you being over here today, and we're having a great meeting. Of course, the time this airs, it's going to be weeks, maybe even a month or so after. So we appreciate you tuning in. And again, this is a ministry out of the Love Valley Baptist Church, Kings Mountain, North Carolina. Our pastor, Barry Philbeck. We appreciate our church family. We appreciate our pastor giving us the means to be able to do this. Please continue to like, share, follow, review, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. And continue to follow us and be a part of our family here on the Christian Construction Podcast. So we hope you'll tune in again next week here on the podcast.